She parked her white Escalade inside my workshop, on the same day I was polishing my old zoning badge for my granddaughter's show and tell. Name's Walter Hayes. 68. Retired zoning officer. The air smelled like linseed oil and trouble. That badge? Still tucked in the cracked leather wallet by my coffee mug. Ever wonder what happens when the wrong person picks the wrong garage? Walter returned from his Tuesday breakfast at Daisy's Diner to find a white SUV parked entirely inside his workshop. On the windshield, a note that read, "Needed shade. Thanks." He stood there for a beat, coffee thermos still warm in his palm, its black lid glinting in the early light. The SUV wasn't just nudging the threshold, it was squared up inside like it belonged there, tailpipes angled half an inch from his grinder table. No apology, no knock on the office window. Just a note. Thanks. Walter's eyebrows rose just slightly. No irritation, no muttering. Instead, he took another slow sip of coffee. Bitter, black, and exactly how he liked it. The same kind of coffee he'd carried into city zoning meetings back when he still wore the badge that let him enforce order with a clipboard and patience. A quick glance upward showed the small rusted sign on the roll-up door had been brushed aside by the SUV's bumper, "Private workshop, by appointment only." He'd hammered that sign up 12 years ago and barely touched it since. The breeze carried in the chirps of robins, the damp scent of fir and morning dew. Somewhere across the road, Irene McMillan's wind chimes tinkled behind her porch plants. She'd be up already, no doubt behind her lace curtains, two hands wrapped around her oatmeal bowl like always. If Irene had seen the Escalade roll in, he'd hear about it later. Walter tapped his index finger against the side of the thermos. Instead of reacting, he walked to the side wall, opened the breaker box, and rewound the workshop's CCTV feed. The feed was grainy, color-drained, nothing fancy. He liked it that way. Rewind. Pause. There, 7:42 a.m. The Escalade crawled in like a cat squeezing into a sunny spot. No driver-side hesitation, no knock. Just a smooth roll-in, brake lights, then the glint of sunglasses. The camera's mic, weak as it was, picked up faint opera, Puccini, maybe. He smiled dryly. She hadn't so much as checked for someone home. A gentle breeze wouldn't get that kind of pass from him, but apparently, the owner of this vehicle thought differently. He took out a sticky note from the pegboard by the sink. Carefully, with the deliberate script he'd once used for inspection tags, he wrote, "Next time, please ask. Shade is negotiable. WDitch." He walked over, placed it neatly on the SUV's windshield beside the original note, then stepped back. Before he could retreat inside, Irene's voice called from across the lawn. "New neighbor, I'm guessing." Walter nodded. Appears she needed shade more than manners. She's got flair, Irene mused, adjusting her housecoat, eyes squinting toward the gleaming SUV. License plates from California. You know how they are. He only hummed, already reaching for the workshop door. But the mail slot clinked. A padded envelope had landed on the floor. Inside, a full-color booklet. On the cover, a glossy photo of manicured lawns, pastel mailboxes, and a woman in a sun hat arranging tulips. Title in cursive, Karen's Guide to Visual Harmony. Walter flipped through it, pages of rules on acceptable garden gnome colors, fencing materials, and parking aesthetics. He raised a brow when he spotted a section titled Proportion and Placement, How Large is Too Large for a Backyard Shed? Welcome package, Irene said knowingly. She came knocking on my door too. Called herself the liaison for the HOA. That's so, Walter muttered. Just then, the sound of heels on gravel drew both their gazes to the side path. The SUV's owner was striding confidently toward them, clipboard in hand. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, scarf knotted like she'd stepped out of a real estate brochure. A smile, wide and unbothered, flashed as she extended a manicured hand. Hi there. I'm Karen. Karen Whitmore. I'm the new HOA liaison here, just a volunteer role, of course. She laughed lightly, then gestured toward the SUV. I hope you didn't mind. Just needed a bit of shade. That old pine casts the loveliest morning shadow. Walter shook her hand without expression. Walter Hayes. Wonderful to meet you. I've been reviewing community cohesion policies, and your property is unique. I've included my guide for visual unity. It's just a starting point. We'll get everything aligned in no time. He smiled faintly, no wider than the line of a nail head. Karen continued talking, voice chirpy, tone always on the edge of a command dressed up as a compliment. When she finally left, with a wave like royalty, Walter turned and walked slowly back to his workbench. He picked up a rag, wiped his hands free of flaxseed oil, then opened the bottom drawer. Beneath an old blueprint and a tin of nails lay a small plastic placard, yellowed at the edges. He dusted it off, squinted at the faded letters, then stepped outside once more. Walter cackled quietly under his breath as he pressed it back onto the inside of the workshop door, securing it with 2 rusted screws. Karen stood in front of a folding table at the HOA Spring Garden Day, holding a microphone and declaring, "We deserve a unified floral standard." The words hung in the air like the last note of a church bell, too loud, too sharp for a gentle morning in Fairhaven Ridge. Around her, bright pink streamers fluttered between trees, tables overflowed with seed packets and lemon bars, and children zigzagged across the grass, chasing bubbles and each other. Yet in that moment, the laughter thinned, replaced by the faint squeak of the microphone as Karen smiled wide beneath her oversized sunglasses. Imagine, she continued, a community where each house complements the next, lavender borders, matching rose tones, no visual clutter. True aesthetic peace. Walter stood a few paces back beneath the shade of a silver maple, arms folded loosely across his chest. Irene had set up a folding card table nearby, hawking her famous oatmeal walnut cookies, but even she had paused to watch the scene unfolding at the park's tiny concrete stage. "Last time someone pushed uniform hedges," she murmured, voice low, "we ended up with 4 fines and a fistfight." Walter didn't answer. His eyes tracked Karen's hand as she waved a stack of printed guidelines in the air. He could already guess what they said: acceptable bloom colors, flowerbed symmetry ratios, permissible deviations. He'd written zoning policies in 3 counties during his time. He knew the language of control dressed in florals. A clipboard was passed around, invitations to join the Color Cohesion Committee. Nearby, Paul Greeley, barely into his 30s and already thinning at the crown, stood nodding along. Walter recognized the look, that polite nod of someone who didn't yet realize he was being gently steamrolled. Children darted between booths. One of them, a wiry boy in a yellow hoodie, wiped grape jelly on his shorts before pedaling his scuffed bike too close to Walter and skidding into the grass. "Mr. Hayes," the boy called breathlessly. "My chain popped again. You got that silver tool thingy?" Walter raised an eyebrow. "You mean a wrench?" "Yeah. The twisty kind. Mom said you're a fix-it legend." Walter knelt beside the bike without a word, flipping it expertly onto its handlebars. He examined the chain, noting the wear, then produced the requested twisty thingy from his jacket pocket. As he worked, Irene leaned in with a paper plate. "You'll want one of these before she replaces sugar with HOA-approved stevia," she quipped, setting a cookie in his free hand. "And keep an eye on that one." She nodded toward Karen. "She's already handed out 10 citations, verbal for now." Sure enough, Walter's eyes caught the edge of a pale blue envelope sticking from the pocket of his windbreaker. He opened it and read the typed note. "Visual inconsistency, garage door painted slate gray. Suggested correction, neutral beige, see enclosed palette. HOA liaison." He exhaled slowly, nose barely twitching. Slate gray had been on his garage for 5 years. He set the envelope down on the bike's seat, wiped his hands, and walked to his truck. From behind the passenger seat, he retrieved an old manila folder, one of many labeled Zoning Ref. WDH in neat black print. A few blocks down, the public park gave way to the edge of the HOA's jurisdiction. He caught up to Paul just past the lemonade stand, and the two stepped aside near the mulch bins. "Section 7B, Walter said, thumbing through the folder until he found the highlighted clause. Structures set back more than 50 feet from the public roadway are exempt from visual conformity under Zoning Code 4.9. Paul blinked. I didn't know that. Most folks don't, Walter said mildly, tucking the paper back in its sleeve. But it's there. Hasn't changed since '09. Paul nodded slowly. I'll bring it up at the next board meeting. Appreciated. They shook hands. As Walter walked back, a breeze picked up, lifting loose flyers and spinning a bubble wand across the grass. Children squealed. Irene clapped her hands to get their attention. Cody wheeled by again, brakes screeching lightly. I owe you, he called. Twice now. Walter allowed himself a rare smile. You'll keep count, huh? Karen was still stationed by the table, now chatting with a group of homeowners holding small paper cups of hibiscus tea. But her posture had changed. Her arms were crossed, chin tilted slightly, the sunglasses reflecting the mid-morning sun. She wasn't looking at the kids or the cookies or the flyers. She was looking directly at Walter's house, more precisely, at the top of his garage, her head tilting like a carpenter measuring roof pitch. Walter stepped into his shop and froze. Karen's SUV was back, this time, parked between the lift and his Mustang. The late afternoon sun filtered through the high transom windows, casting angled slashes of gold onto the floor, where dust floated like faint smoke. The usual whir of a low-pressure air tank sighed in the background, but everything else in the garage, the tools, the bolts, the quiet hum of order, had stopped. Because there, with all four wheels squarely inside, stood the white Escalade. He blinked once. Then again. The SUV hadn't merely nudged in. It had backed itself in neatly, tailpipes just inches from his lathe bench. It stood like a visiting dignitary, oblivious to the grease beneath it, as if this were a showroom instead of a retired mechanic's sanctuary. From her perch across the yard, Irene sat beneath her striped awning, a knitting needle frozen in midair. Walter didn't look toward her, but he could sense the pause. The town might be small, but word traveled faster than oil on concrete. Inside, the familiar scent of metal and linseed mingled with a less welcome note, something floral and synthetic, like lavender-scented seat warmers. Walter took one slow step forward, the toe of his boot brushing against the edge of a discarded gasket. There was no note this time. No flapping piece of paper left on a windshield. When the side door opened and Karen appeared, heels clicking against the concrete, opera faintly playing from her phone, Walter didn't say a word. She walked around the rear of her SUV, sunglasses firmly in place, arms folded like she was surveying a plot of land she had every right to redesign. It's temporary, she said, without being asked. I needed to unload some fertilizer and shade my orchids. Walter's eyes flicked toward the overhead camera. The red LED blinked, as it should. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved toward his Mustang, running his fingers along the fender, checking for fresh dust. Then he opened his drawer chest, withdrew a metal tape measure, and stretched it, one clean pull, between the lift and the SUV's side mirror. 18 inches clearance, he muttered to himself. Too close for airflow. Karen didn't blink. It's fine. Your car's not even running. Walter retracted the tape with a sharp snap. He walked to the back wall and unlocked a steel cabinet marked Private, Zoned Archive. Inside were folders, some yellowed, all labeled in his tight handwriting. He slid out a file marked Encroachment, Multi-Vehicle, 2020 Ref and laid it flat on his work table. Karen glanced around the space like a guest raiding a rental property. You've got so much room in here, she said, voice breezy. Most people in this neighborhood have two-car garages. Yours is practically a municipal facility. Walter said nothing. Just opened the folder and read a line aloud to himself. No vehicle shall remain on or in another property's enclosure beyond a reasonable duration, especially without consent. Zoning Code 5.14. Karen didn't respond. She just smiled faintly, then walked past the Mustang, brushing against a hanging rag. Outside, the sound of a delivery truck drew closer. Two men in brown uniforms wheeled a dolly past the drive, slowed briefly as one nudged the other. Is that her car? One whispered. Man, bold move. Walter heard them but didn't turn. Instead, he reached for his phone, the old flip model he still preferred, and dialed into the shop's security system. He toggled through the menu until he saw the camera feed. Then, with a slow press of his thumb, he activated the cloud backup. A quiet beep confirmed the transfer. He set the phone down beside his coffee mug, a faded ceramic cup with a hairline crack near the rim. He sipped, eyes steady. Measure twice, he whispered, weld once. That evening, long after Karen had driven away without acknowledgement or apology, Walter bolted the shop's main door, then added the side lock. He looped the heavy steel chain and clicked the padlock shut. Then he crossed the gravel path to the side wall and secured the motion sensor's alignment. Inside his house, he drew the blinds and returned to his desk, where a newer binder now sat beside his zoning archive. On the cover, Incident Logs, KMW. Meanwhile, across the street, Irene wrote in a neat cursive hand inside a marbled notebook. Day 3, she's parked inside the vault now. He didn't raise his voice, but the coffee cup came out. That means gears are turning. For the sake of future generations, I'm documenting this. As twilight settled, Walter stood at his kitchen window, cradling the cup in both hands. The Mustang was safe, the Escalade gone. For now. Then came the sound of heels on pavement. Karen passed by his gate, waving as if nothing had happened. Her voice was light and oddly musical. Nice place. Shame if it were inaccessible. Walter calmly put on his welding gloves, flipped down his visor, and sealed his workshop shut with 3 lines of molten steel. The hiss of the arc welder sliced through the soft evening hush, echoing faintly against the siding of nearby homes. A few birds scattered from the oak tree near the driveway, startled by the sharp, metallic crackle. But Walter's motions were precise and quiet, like he was drawing careful stitches instead of melting steel. The first line sealed the side door, a clean horizontal bead that gleamed bright before fading to dull gray. The second, at the rear entrance, traced an arch over the latch plate. The third was the main garage door, welded down at 3 points like anchors on a ship's hull. He didn't pause between them. His rhythm was steady, deliberate, and nearly silent, save for the sizzle of metal bonding metal. Across the street, Irene sat on her porch swing, knitting needles momentarily still. She watched without comment, her glasses reflecting each burst of orange light. Clark, who lived 2 doors down, stood at his mailbox holding junk flyers he hadn't even read. He said nothing, just leaned slightly forward to see better. Once Walter finished the last weld, he stepped back and inspected the work. No scorch marks on the siding. No sloppy runs. Just 3 clean closures. He removed his gloves, rolled his shoulders, and hung the welder back on its hook. Then he walked to the shed, pulled out a brushed aluminum sign from behind an old lawnmower, and screwed it into the door. Workshop temporarily secured, no entry without zoning permit ref. WDH 1029. Satisfied, he went inside to pack. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, Eugene Airport bustled with its usual mix of sleepy travelers and college kids heading home. Walter sat by gate 12, sipping black coffee from a waxy paper cup. His phone lay closed beside him, its flip-style screen dark and silent. He wore a clean blue jacket, his old corduroy duffel resting at his feet. Tucked inside, next to socks and reading glasses, was a well-thumbed paperback copy of Northwest Zoning Laws, annotated. He never traveled without it. Not out of need, really, more out of habit. It made him feel grounded. His flight to Spokane wasn't for another 30 minutes. Just enough time to check the news or, in his case, let silence settle in before a weekend with his granddaughter, Lila. Back in Fairhaven Ridge, the storm had already begun to brew. Karen's SUV still sat inside Walter's workshop, snug as a trapped cat. She had returned mid-morning, opera playing, expecting nothing out of the ordinary, maybe a condescending text, maybe another polite note from Walter. What she got instead was steel. The moment she pulled up and found the doors fused shut, her sunglasses came off. She banged on the metal, rattled the handles, circled the building 3 times. Her Escalade was visible through a side window, right where she'd left it. Untouched. Unharmed. But unreachable. She dialed HOA President Paul, who hesitated before promising to look into it. She called the local police, who came, looked, and declined to act without a civil warrant. No damage, no threat, they said, shrugging. If it's his property and his garage, there's nothing unlawful here. Karen tried the locksmith, who asked for a proof of ownership. When she couldn't provide it, he refused to proceed. Then came the yelling. The pacing. The phone calls. By late afternoon, Irene had filled 3 full pages in her notebook. She's tried 6 calls, 2 emails, and 1 public post on the HOA board titled Abuse of Power, a Community in Crisis. She's currently pacing in wedges, on gravel. Mistake. Somewhere over Oregon, Walter reclined slightly in his narrow window seat, arms folded loosely across his chest. The sky was clear, the hum of the plane soft. His phone buzzed once. Then again. Then 5 more times in rapid succession. He opened the flip phone, slowly, deliberately. 7 messages. All from the same number. The preview texts were short. You welded my car in. This is not over. You will be liable. I called HOA and the city. This is harassment. You've made a huge mistake. And finally, you'll pay for this. Walter stared at the screen for a moment. Then he tapped a single button on the side of the phone. A small crescent moon appeared. Do not disturb. He shut the phone and returned it to his jacket pocket. Then he looked out the window and smiled faintly, eyes tracing the distant lines of farmland far below. For once, he thought, things felt quiet. Garage hostage crisis? Irene blinked, squinting at the Channel 6 headline. You've got to be kidding me. She adjusted her bifocals and leaned closer to the little TV mounted above Daisy's diner counter. The camera cut from the anchor's polished grin to a shaky shot of Karen Whitmore, standing dramatically outside Walter's closed workshop in heels far too tall for the gravel. Her tone was urgent, measured, rehearsed. This kind of vigilantism, Karen declared, gesturing to the sealed garage door, sets a dangerous precedent for community disputes. I was denied access to my personal vehicle. At booth 7, old Gus nearly choked on his hash browns. Denied? She parked herself into a corner, he muttered. Twice, Irene added, sipping her coffee, arms folded. The news clip continued. Karen waved a copy of the HOA bylaws, printed and highlighted, and referenced vague terms like neighborhood decency and safe vehicular access. The camera panned across Walter's closed shop, with Channel SX's headline banner glowing in red, Garage Hostage Crisis in Fairhaven Ridge. Back at the counter, the diner buzzed with commentary. A retired schoolteacher whispered to her husband. A younger waitress posted a blurry photo of the TV to the town Facebook group. Then came the rebuttal. The screen faded to a softer interview, outside Irene's white porch, a flowering dogwood blooming in the background. She wore a calm smile, sun hat slightly tilted, a steaming mug in hand. I think folks sometimes forget boundaries matter, she said. You trespass, you get trapped. Simple as that. That single clip exploded online. Within hours, the HOA's community board lit up. Some called Walter's response excessive, most called it brilliant. Threads of discussion branched into zoning laws, private property rights, and, inevitably, Karen's floral micromanagement. Walter hadn't returned to Fairhaven Ridge yet, but his name became legend. One post read, "This man welded peace into the neighborhood. We should elect him." Another, "Karen once fined me for my welcome mat." I stand with Walter. By mid-afternoon, Channel 6 aired a follow-up. This time, the story had shifted tone. They aired footage from security cameras, one across the street from Walter's garage, another from the corner mailbox cluster. Both showed Karen entering the workshop. Alone. No permission. No invitation. Even more damning, she parked, left, and didn't return for 2 full days. Karen tried to counter, but the narrative had tilted. And then came the quiet blow. An anonymous email arrived in the HOA board inbox. It contained a scan of Karen's driver's license, suspended 3 months prior due to an unpaid ticket. Attached was also her vehicle's registration, expired since January. HOA President Paul Greeley didn't respond immediately, but he printed the documents and scheduled an urgent compliance meeting. Rumors spread fast. Did you hear? Rita whispered to Irene at the community mailbox later that evening. About the license? And the plates? Irene simply nodded. Sometimes facts don't shout, she said. They wait patiently, then strike clean. Across town, teenagers started calling Walter Garage Gandalf. Cody, ever loyal, posted in the Fairhaven Neighbors group, "Mr. Hayes is cooler than Batman." Even Gus clicked like. Karen's situation turned from grievance to spectacle. The more she insisted on justice, the more people dug into the HOA archives, finding oddities, inconsistencies, minutes edited after meetings. Then, as dusk fell and the sky turned pink over Fairhaven Ridge, Karen returned from Channel SX's studio, still in her crisp blazer and echoing heels. She pulled up to the corner where the HOA message board stood, normally plastered with lost pet notices and bake sale flyers. There, taped dead center in bold black letters, was a fresh notice. Unauthorized vehicles may be secured without notice. Her jaw tightened. Behind her, a screen door creaked open. Irene stepped out, watering can in hand. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The HOA meeting hall was packed. Some came for justice. Others came for popcorn. Fairhaven's community hall hadn't seen this much foot traffic since the 4th of July potluck in 2012. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum floors as neighbors filed in, clutching reusable coffee cups and brown napkins holding Irene's legendary oatmeal cookies. The ceiling fan hummed a rhythm overhead, occasionally groaning like it might give up and fall at any moment. Walter arrived 5 minutes early, as always. He wore a crisp plaid shirt tucked neatly into his worn jeans and nodded politely at familiar faces. Some smiled back, some simply widened their eyes at the sight of him showing up at all. Irene sat near the middle, cardigan draped around her shoulders, basket of Justice Bites cookies on the chair beside her. Each one was labeled with a sticker shaped like a tiny gavel. Near the front stood Paul Greeley, the HOA president, fumbling with a laptop connected to a projector. Sweat darkened the collar of his polo shirt. And then Karen entered. She swept through the double doors like she owned the place, clad in a blazer the color of gunmetal and sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Her manila folder looked bloated, its edges marked with sticky notes and highlighter. She headed straight to the table near the podium and began arranging her case like an attorney preparing for trial. The buzz of conversation settled when Paul tapped the microphone. "Good evening, Fairhaven Ridge residents. Thank you for attending this special session of the Homeowners Association." Karen stood before she was called, cleared her throat theatrically, and began. "I'm here today to raise serious concerns about a certain individual who, through a deliberate and dangerous act, has obstructed the basic right to access personal property. I refer, of course, to Mr. Walter Hayes." Some gasped. Others rolled their eyes. She continued, voice unwavering. "His actions, including the welding shut of a private structure while my vehicle was still inside, violate at least 3 community standards. I have brought documentation." She gestured to her folder. "And," she added, "I believe this sets a precedent we cannot ignore." Paul gave her a tight nod. "Thank you, Ms. Whitmore. Mr. Hayes, would you like to respond?" Walter rose slowly, not hurrying. His boots echoed across the tiles as he approached the podium. "I appreciate the opportunity to speak," he began. "And I'll keep this simple." He opened a thin folder of his own, pulling out a printed zoning map, stamped and signed. "This is the compliance certificate for my workshop, renewed last October. I've also brought the relevant zoning code that permits property owners to secure outbuildings as long as emergency access is maintained, which it was." He paused, then added, "Some of you may not know, I used to serve as a zoning official for Lane County. Retired now. But I still remember the paperwork." A murmur rose from the crowd. He tapped the microphone lightly. As for Ms. Whitmore's vehicle, there was no request, no permission, no note. Just an SUV left in my workspace. Twice. Paul shifted uneasily. "Do we have corroborating evidence?" Walter gestured toward the projector. With a flick of the remote, a grainy security video filled the screen behind him. The footage showed Karen's white Escalade rolling into the workshop, her stepping out, adjusting her scarf, and walking away without even glancing around. No phone call. No message. Just assumption. Karen's smile faded. The room was quiet save for the whirring fan. Irene folded her hands in her lap. Rita leaned forward, whispering, "There it is." Walter clicked once more. The next clip played, Karen re-entering the workshop days later, surprised to find it sealed. Her expression turned to frustration, then fury, her hands flying to her hips. Paul exhaled sharply. "Ms. Whitmore, based on what we've seen, I'm going to strongly recommend you step away from any further HOA-related activity." Karen looked to him, then to the room. No one met her gaze. Irene passed a cookie to the teenager beside her. "I made extra," she whispered. Karen gathered her folder with stiff fingers. Her jaw moved like she wanted to say something, but no sound came. She turned, heels clicking a beat too fast on the linoleum, and walked out through the same double doors. Not a word. Not a glance back. From her seat, Irene breathed out softly, almost like a sigh laced with years of experience and quiet vindication. "Show's over." A plain brown envelope slipped under Walter's door. Inside, a typed message, "You may have won this round, but I'm not finished." He read it without expression, the paper held delicately between two fingers, like a mechanic inspecting a brittle gasket. The letter wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The sterile typeface, the calculated lack of fingerprints, the passive-aggressive threat whispered between the lines, it all reeked of Karen. Outside, Fairhaven Ridge was warming into spring. Azaleas bloomed across neatly trimmed hedges, kids kicked soccer balls against fences, and dogs lay sun-drenched on porches. Yet the Whitmore house remained shuttered, its curtains drawn tight like eyelids refusing to see. Walter didn't speak of the letter. He folded it once, slipped it behind the bookshelf near his old zoning binders, and returned to his coffee. The steel kettle hissed softly on the stove, and the morning light caught the edge of his ceramic mug, cracks still running diagonally like a fault line across a placid hill. Irene arrived not long after with 2 jars of her rhubarb jam and a knowing look. "She's not done," she said without needing to ask. Walter nodded. 3 days later, a man in a city vehicle knocked on the workshop door. He wore a green vest and carried a clipboard. "Mr. Hayes? We received an anonymous tip about possible environmental hazards. Something about unregistered chemical storage?" Walter raised an eyebrow and pointed to the binder on the wall. "Inventory sheets updated monthly. Want a copy?" The inspector took a short tour, muttered appreciatively about the tidy labeling, and left with nothing to file. The next morning, a different knock. This time, a fire marshal with sharp eyes and a digital tablet. Annual check wasn't scheduled, but a concern was filed. Something about blocked exits. Walter gestured to the wide, unobstructed double doors, the lit exit signs, and the newly replaced extinguishers mounted per regulation. "Would you like coffee while you document that everything's in compliance?" The marshal chuckled. "No need. You're good." 2 more days, 2 more visits, one from planning and development, another from city zoning itself. Irene sat on her porch through each one, hands wrapped around her mug, quietly documenting the parade like a neighborhood historian. Cody rode his bike in loops, pausing to watch and wave. "Miss Whitmore's really trying," he said, hopping off to hand Walter a sticker. It read, in loopy handwriting, "Zoning Boss, Certified." Walter smiled and patted the boy's shoulder. "Measure twice, file once." By Friday afternoon, all reports had been dismissed. Every form returned stamped compliant. Every folder closed without note. That evening, Walter walked to the HOA bulletin board with Irene beside him and Cody trailing close. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac. With a piece of blue painter's tape, Walter secured a new notice to the center of the board. "Still zoned. Still standing." A few neighbors gathered, chuckling, snapping photos. Someone suggested turning it into a bumper sticker. Someone else offered to post it on the Fairhaven Neighbors page. Back at her house, behind tightly sealed curtains, Karen scrolled through the notifications. Her eyes paused on a new message in the community group chat. It was from Irene. "Officially the cleanest workshop in Oregon." Karen read the message once, then again. She did not respond. "She's gone," Irene said, watching the moving truck roll down the street. "No goodbyes. Just cardboard and curtains." The vehicle rumbled past the lilac bushes, turned onto Fairhaven Ridge's main loop, and disappeared behind the blooming dogwoods. A few neighbors stood silently near their mailboxes, not waving, not smiling, just watching. The house Karen had occupied for nearly 6 months now sat empty, its windows blank-eyed, the "for sale" sign listing lazily to one side. Irene stood on Walter's porch, cardigan folded neatly over her arm, a plate of banana bread cradled in her hands. She didn't offer it. Not yet. Walter nodded slowly, his gaze steady on the retreating truck. "Peaceful morning," he murmured. Cody darted into the yard, trailed by 2 other kids lugging a bundle of colorful paper and tape. "Mr. Hayes. We finished the poster." The artwork was large, nearly as tall as Cody himself. On a background of bold crayon yellows and greens stood a cheerful rendering of Walter's workshop, steel doors gleaming, Walter drawn with a broad smile, standing in the open entryway. Above the door, they had scrawled in uneven block letters, "The Vault." And in the corner, almost like an afterthought, was a small figure of a woman in dark sunglasses, frowning behind a picket fence. "We wanted to hang it next to the door," Cody beamed, "so everyone knows this is the safe zone." Walter chuckled, his smile easy. "Just be sure you use the right zoning tape." Cody blinked, then laughed like he wasn't sure if it was a joke but liked it anyway. Later that afternoon, the neighborhood gathered for Spring Thank You Day, a tradition previously led by clipboard-wielding volunteers and awkward finger food. But this year, folding tables were full of pies, pitchers of iced tea, and home-labeled lemonade. Irene's cookies made an appearance, of course, each one adorned with tiny sugar hammers. Paul Greeley, no longer wearing his HOA name tag, passed out a stack of survey cards titled, "What Should Fairhaven Do Next?" It was the first time anyone could recall the board actually asking. Walter stood off to the side beneath the shade of an oak, sipping his coffee from a plain white mug. The sun warmed his shoulders, the breeze ruffled the collar of his shirt, and the laughter of children floated between the rustling leaves like music. Toward the end of the afternoon, Paul approached him quietly and handed over a small envelope. "No form. No threat," Paul said, smiling. "Just a thank you." Walter opened it as he walked home. Inside was a simple card, handwritten by the new HOA committee, "Thanks for showing us how rules should serve people." He stopped by the workshop. The poster was already taped near the door, flapping a bit at the edges. Cody had used 3 strips of painter's tape and a small rock to keep the bottom from curling. Irene had left a plastic sleeve with a printed version of the image, neatly laminated, complete with the title, "The Vault." Walter found a small brass hook, screwed it into the siding just left of the doorframe, and hung the framed piece with care. The little figure of Karen stood frozen in the artwork, her cartoon sunglasses glinting beneath a crayon sun. Walter sat in his usual chair just outside the workshop door, one leg crossed gently over the other, steam rising from his coffee. He read the card again, then looked up at the town he'd lived in for nearly 3 decades, their laughter, their effort, their growth. Next to him, the laminated artwork caught a ray of afternoon light gleaming softly. In a quiet town where one steel door changed everything, neighbors found their voice not through protest, but through patience, truth, and one man's quiet resolve. Walter didn't shout. He simply reminded everyone what boundaries meant, and how respect isn't written into bylaws, it's earned, one small act at a time. When rules are used to serve, not control, even the rustle of a workshop curtain can sound like freedom. Perhaps the next time someone draws a line in your driveway, you'll know just how powerful it is to stand, firm, steady, and kind.